Welcome back to The Explainer. Okay, let's dive right into this. Today, we're unpacking something genuinely fascinating, the 4 stages of Adlerian therapy. It's a completely different way of looking at human psychology, one that's built entirely on collaboration and setting goals. Before we get deep into the psychological frameworks here, I want you to ask yourself a kind of heavy question. Have you ever wondered why you actually do the things you do? Or how you historically seek belonging? Well, that search for significance, that is the absolute beating heart of the Adlerian approach.
Here's our roadmap for today's journey. First, the Adlerian philosophy. Then, stages 1 and 2, followed by stages 3 and 4. After that, we'll hit clinical strengths, look at limitations and critiques, and wrap up with a humanistic framework.
Starting off with part 1, the Adlerian philosophy, where it's all about social context over pathology. So the core thesis of Adlerian therapy is that it is fundamentally a collaborative, goal-oriented process. And what makes this so distinct is its intense focus on social context. Instead of treating a person like a broken machine and constantly hunting for the pathology, like what's wrong with them, it zooms out. It looks at the whole garden, so to speak. The emphasis here is heavily on encouragement and moving towards social interest. It's just an incredibly forward-looking foundation.
Moving right along to part 2, stages 1 and 2, which cover engagement and assessment.
Let's move to and see how this builds across 4 distinct yet overlapping stages. We start at engagement, we move right into assessment, discover insight, and then finally reach reorientation. It's a very logical progression, taking us all the way from building a solid relationship straight through to taking concrete action. Now, what's really interesting about this is how stage 1 frames the very beginning of the process. It's all about engagement and relationship. The primary focus isn't just to sit down and start diagnosing right out of the gate. Not at all. It's to establish a relationship built entirely on empathy, trust, and mutual respect. The therapist actually acts as a supportive peer rather than some distant expert, which is an absolutely vital distinction. Then, once the client feels fully understood and valued, that's when they step into stage 2, assessment.
During this assessment stage, the therapist basically becomes a sort of investigative guide. They pull out tools like a family constellation and early recollections to really piece together this psychological puzzle. Analytically, they're looking closely at things like birth order and a person's earliest memories. Why? To investigate how the client historically sought to belong within their very first social system, their family.
But what is the ultimate goal of all that deep investigation? Well, it's to uncover 2 main concepts, lifestyle and private logic. The therapist is essentially trying to find the unique, completely hidden operating system that actively governs the client's behavior today. You can think of it as the secret code driving their everyday actions. Okay, part 3, stages 3 and 4, insight and reorientation. So, stage 3 is insight. This marks the big transition from investigation over to interpretation. The therapist is helping the client actually make sense of all the findings from that earlier assessment. But here is the absolutely crucial detail. Insight is never forced. It's discovered through collaborative dialogue. It's 2 people working together to help the client understand exactly why they do what they do. And a massive part of that collaborative discovery is identifying what Adlerian theory calls mistaken goals. This is the real aha moment. It's when the client suddenly realizes how their own private logic, remember that hidden operating system we talked about, how that might actually be creating their problematic outcomes. Stage 3 basically shines a super bright spotlight right on those mistaken goals.
Which brings us to the final phase, stage 4, reorientation. And this one is all about action. The client is actively encouraged to step out, take risks, and experiment with totally new, more socially useful behaviors. This stage represents a critical shift. It's literally the bridge from simply understanding yourself to making real, tangible changes out in the world.
Now for part 4, clinical strengths, looking at the actual efficacy of the model.
So how does this all actually perform in practice? Well, the evaluation outlines a really balanced view of both the strengths and the limitations of these 4 stages. And this brilliantly illustrates the strength side of this clinical reality first. So let's take a look. The evaluation identifies 3 core strengths. First up is agency. Because the therapist acts as a peer, it highly empowers clients as active participants. Second is holism. It addresses the whole person within their family system rather than just, isolating a single symptom. And third is flexibility. The fluidity of these stages means they can be beautifully adapted to fit various cultural contexts and individual needs. It's just a really empowering system.
Moving to Part 5, limitations and critiques, because we do have to talk about the challenges.
When we weigh those strengths against the limitations, we see a pretty clear trade-off. So the crucial point is that the holistic, flexible nature of the therapy also introduces some significant subjectivity and cognitive demand. This intensive approach is simply not going to be suitable for everyone, and it's really important we understand why that is. Breaking down those critiques, we find three main roadblocks. First up is subjectivity. The whole process relies so heavily on the therapist's interpretive skill. I mean, if they misinterpret that private logic, the process just stalls out. Second is cognitive load. Exploring these really abstract, mistaken goals requires a high level of verbal reasoning, which honestly can be exhausting for some clients. And finally, time intensity. Doing these deep, thorough lifestyle assessments takes a lot of time, especially when you compare it to shorter, more direct behavioral interventions.
And that brings us to our final section, Part 6, a humanistic framework, to conclude our journey.
This really brings everything together into one powerful summary of the entire four-stage journey. It says, the 4 stages of Adlerian therapy provide a robust, humanistic framework for psychological growth. By moving from a secure relationship to deep insight and finally to social action, this model ensures that change is not just behavioral, but deeply rooted in a reclaimed sense of belonging and contribution.
So I want to leave you with a question today. Based on everything we've just unpacked, how might reclaiming your own sense of belonging and contribution completely change your daily actions? If you were to actually sit down and examine your own private logic, what new, socially useful behaviors might you experiment with? It is a really powerful concept to reflect on, for sure. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll see you in the next one.